Hello and welcome to another great edition of Beyond the Hype with Black Enterprise. I'm Alfred Edmund Jr., Senior Vice President and Executive Editor at Black Enterprise. And once again, we have a powerful show, a great guest, and a critically important topic to discuss. Listen, let's jump into it. We're talking about the whole concept of equal justice under the law. And of course, most people, most Americans believe on some level that exists. It's a big part of what makes America the nation that it is. Most of us, unfortunately, have learned our perceptions of the law and equal justice from popular culture, whether TV shows. I'm a big Law and Order junkie. That was probably the most realistic look at how it really works. But most of us have a very unrealistic idea of what equal justice is, and even whether it actually exists or not. Of course, criminal justice issues, equal justice issues are critical issues for Black communities, as we've seen throughout our history, but certainly over the past several years, including the murder of George Floyd. But often we still don't have a real clear idea of what it looks like from the inside. And today's guest lives and breathes that world and is on the front lines of the fight for equal justice. Please welcome to the show, Twyla Carter, Attorney-in-Chief and CEO of the Legal Aid Society. Thank you for joining us, Twyla.
Thank you so much for having me, Alfred.
Now, listen, I got to meet you at our Women of Power Summit earlier this year, and you impressed upon me, and I've since learned even more about the work that you're doing. But before we get into that, I always want our audience to understand how our guests come to be who they are today. How did Twyla Carter end up becoming the Attorney-in-Chief and CEO of the Legal Aid Society? I mean, was that something you wanted to do when you were growing up? Talk about your legal career, your education. Just talk about how the journey, where it started, and how you became to be doing what you do today.
Well, I appreciate the question. Thank you so much. I am in a dream job for sure. So I only went to law school to be a public defender. So that is what my personal statement to law school stated, was that I wanted to serve and protect underserved, marginalized communities. And so I went to law school to be a public defender, was able to be a public defender in Martin Luther King Jr. County in Seattle and King County, Washington. Did that for a little over a decade and was the misdemeanor practice director out there, which meant that I oversaw the misdemeanor practice for the 4 different nonprofit organizations that worked in misdemeanor court. Misdemeanors, just for your audience, are those offenses or crimes that are lower level, if you will, where you can face up to a year in jail. So like shoplifting, other types of theft, carjacking, that sort of thing. And so I was the director of that department for a while and then moved out to New York City to work as a senior staff attorney at the ACLU national office. So I actually took a title demotion and a pay cut to go work at the national level. It was probably the smartest decision I could have made in my career to do that. And it allowed me to then work all over the country, especially in the Deep South, in the Midwest, throughout the country around bail reform, which is the idea that cash bail, a ransom, if you will, should not be utilized for people who are accused of a crime and presumed innocent under the law. They have not been convicted. So worked for 4 years trying to reform that system and also to ensure that low-income people did have a right to have a public defender. And so I did that for about 4 years. And then I had the amazing opportunity again to work as the National Legal and Policy Director at a national nonprofit organization called the Bail Project, which was located in LA County in Venice Beach, if you will, and worked all over the country trying to eliminate the use of cash bail, make the use of pretrial detention rare. And so I did that for a year and then had this amazing opportunity to come here to lead the largest and oldest public defender and civil legal services organization in the country. And as I sit here, I am the first Black woman, first Asian American in this role in 148 years.
Whenever I hear those first stories, a couple of things hit my mind. There's always, the first is like, what took so long? And then the second thing is what an exceptional person, an experience that has to be for you to step in those shoes, being authentically who you are and bringing something different to the role than anybody who's ever been in that role. has ever brought to the role. So, briefly talk about what that meant for you, or if anything, in terms of your day-to-day work, your impact on the people that you work with, work for, the people that you serve. What does it mean to be a history maker, if you will, in the history of the organization?
It's amazing, as you can imagine. And I want to say, first and foremost, the executive leadership team is also, I think, representative in a way that you don't see around the country as leaders of nonprofit organizations, corporations, law firms, etc. Our three chief attorneys of our criminal practice, our civil practice, and our juvenile rights practice, two are Black women. One is a woman. Our third woman is representing the LGBTQ plus community. So we are extremely proud of the fact that we have minorities and folks from marginalized groups that are leading this organization. In fact, out of our leadership team, the majority of us are women. So it's something that we are extremely proud of. And so coming in as the first Black woman, first Asian American, to your point, on one side it's yay, great. And on the other side, this is New York City. How is that possible that it
Right.
took this long? But that being said, I really do try to view everything I do through a racial lens. You can't help but do that. I've been a lawyer, nearly 20 years. I've been Black and Chinese and a woman my entire life. So these are lenses that I cannot remove. And what it has done, though, which is interesting, it has brought an experience that I didn't necessarily expect. I am part of a cohort of Black women in particular that after George Floyd's murder, to your point, there's a record number of Black women leading organizations. And unfortunately, I'm also part of the same cohort of Black women who are fleeing leadership roles in record numbers because of either lack of support from board of directors or unrealistic expectations placed on them from staff or external forces, what have you. So it really is a different feeling to be in this role. I'm certainly so proud to be here. And I know that I want other young Black women, Asian Americans, people of color, children to look up to me and to others and to say, I can see myself doing that job. Part of that, though, is, it brings on a level of scrutiny, as you can imagine, and expectations that from all sides that are sometimes challenging to navigate, but all in all, it is just an honor. It's a privilege to take all of the tools and skills that I've had from doing direct services, complex litigation, civil impact litigation, policy work, leadership, all of that, and bringing it together in this role has been
Just
such
you're
an
laying
honor.
that out touches on many points, and I'm sure we're going to touch on up during the course of our conversation. But one of the things that strikes me, like you said, first of all, we're in New York, can't get more diverse. Just walking down the
Yeah,
street, it's the literal living United Nations.
right,
Just walking down the street, especially in Manhattan, where
right.
just everybody comes together, regardless of economic status. Some people may be taking a limo, other people may be taking a cab, others are taking a subway, but it's all of us together. But my thing is, when you're talking about serving a diverse constituency, there's no more diverse
Mhm.
constituency than all Americans who are entitled, whether they need it or not, to a public defense. Like everybody, no matter where you are with your background, that is part of what you are entitled to as a citizen. And so it just makes sense that that diversity that reflects the whole nation is also reflected in the people that do the work that you do. But the other thing is, I want to get into, and I want to take you back a little bit. We won't spend too much time there. But what makes little Twyla decide she wants to be big Twyla? I mean, how long did you know, or did you know that maybe you didn't know you were going to end up in this particular job, but you talked about your career objective being a public defender. But how early on where or how young were you when you see yourself consciously kind of getting on the path that you ended up being on today?
To both points, first to your first point, you're absolutely right. Our staff, our attorneys, we represent pretty much every race, ethnicity, nationality, if you will, all over the world works here. And certainly the people that we serve, the indigent population of New York City, we're in all 5 boroughs. Again, we're the largest and oldest, certainly in New York City. And so we have criminal defense, so public defense. If you're accused of a crime and you cannot afford an attorney, then we would be assigned and appointed to you. We have about 24 different civil lanes that we do, everything from immigration to public benefits to tax to elder law to, my goodness, education, employment. We cover so much in our civil realm. And then 90% of all of the cases in family court in New York City are our cases. So to your point, we cover the waterfront of issues in New York City courts, and it certainly represents all of the various shades of brown and gray and everything else that comes through New York City. So just wanted to say that first and foremost. To your second question, I have always been somebody who, has used to role play being a lawyer when I was younger. Some, folks grow up role playing with all kinds of things, dolls and everything else. And I certainly did that, but I was always the lawyer. And I think people who are close to me will tell you that, I can certainly argue a point. I half jokingly will say that confrontational is my resting position. And so, I have a lot of deep principles that I stand for, that I try to live my life by. One of them being no human being should be fully defined by their worst decision. The second being that we judge other people's decisions without knowing what their choices were. And then certainly seeing how we as society in the United States of America, we have criminalized mental health, drug misuse, and poverty. And so ever since I was younger, I've always been somebody who really fought for and wanted to protect the little guy, if you will. Whoever was the underdog in the story was who I gravitated towards. I was like that in school. I'm like that when I watch movies. And so this role allows me to tap into the core of who I am. And so, ever since I was small, I would role play being the lawyer and cross-examining people and all of that good stuff. So it's really quite a privilege to be able to.
Well, I love it.
Dream,
As you know, the big part of the Black Enterprise legacy, and I've been at BE now 37, going on 38 years, is that we don't always know when and where it's going to happen, but there's somebody watching this now who will be, I saw somebody named Twyla Carter on Beyond the Hype, and that's what set the course for what I decided I wanted to do. And I've heard that over and over again. So I'm always curious about, when did you start thinking? And so that's very, very insightful and helpful. The other thing, and I walk a line as the host of this show, I want to be educated enough about my guests to ask intelligent questions, but not so educated that I know it all, or I think I do. Because the whole theme of the show is to find out what I don't know, or what our audience doesn't know, even though we're a very educated audience, very engaged audience. And often we have a lot of misassumptions based on our being an educated audience. And I say all that to say, I was today's years old when I started thinking about the work you do beyond just criminal cases. I mean, you talked about everything from family court to, just the breadth. And it was like, wouldn't I think that other people need public defense or legal resources who can't necessarily afford it, even if they're not literally trying to avoid jail time because of, I didn't think about it through the breadth of the legal system and the degree to which there are lots of situations where citizens need legal support, and it has nothing to do with the criminal courts. It has to do with all these other areas. I'd never thought of that before.
It's absolutely right. And so we're extremely proud of the work that we do here at the Legal Aid Society. We have over 2,200 staff and attorneys and volunteers and interns. Again, we're in all 5 boroughs. We have, my goodness, hundreds of thousands of cases every single year, individuals that we represent literally one at a time in their individual court cases, in addition to about 45,000 calls that we handle a year just on a helpline. So folks that need assistance, that don't have representation, maybe we can't take the case for one reason or another, but people just need help. And what we've learned and what we know, and we have over 40 different units here at the Legal Aid Society, so feel free to look us up and see all the work that we do, from DNA to, again, help for parents, help with foster care, all kinds of services that we provide directly to low income people here in New York City. But what we know to be true is if you invest in communities, if you invest in people, so if we invested in housing and all the things that we're doing on our civil side, we can help to greatly reduce, if not hopefully one day abolish the criminal legal system entirely, right? Like if we just invested in community-based preventative services and programs, we know that that is a model that works. And trying to get the government and others to actually fund us appropriately in that way has been a challenge because, to your point, to be a public defender, you are covered by the United States Constitution, the Sixth Amendment. We're the only job as public defenders, the only job that's covered by the United States Constitution. If you are accused of a crime, you are entitled to effective representation of counsel. So that work is constitutionally and legally mandated. And our civil work, while this is the first jurisdiction in the country to establish a right to counsel in housing court, for example, it's not fully mandated, it's not fully funded. And we know that if we actually invested in those areas, it would make such a huge difference, a significant impact on how people are living, how they're able to thrive in this country and their communities. And again, it would cut down, I think, a lot of the work that we actually have.
Yeah, I'm especially passionate about that. And again, not from a legal expertise in terms of the life that you live, but passionate about juvenile justice and investing in young people in general to create both healthier mental health outcomes. I spent a lot of my time in Chicago. It's my favorite city, although I was born and raised in the New York metro area, New Jersey. That I've had this, it's what you said, that you said very eloquently, that I'm not saying as eloquently, but much of the price that we are paying as a society when it comes to, criminal justice, criminal activity, quality of life, in terms of the choices made by young adults, teens and young adults, the seed was planted so much earlier and could have been addressed so much earlier in terms of creating options for young people, better, addressing mental health concerns when they're first expressed. There's just so much that could be addressed, and I've seen it in programs that I support in Chicago, where I'm just thinking of a particular young man, I'm not going to name him, who was literally on a path to, had an ankle bracelet on at 14. It was on the path, got involved with a program called the Dorothy Genius STEAM Leadership Institute. I'm a mentor to the CEO. And it was a STEAM camp and became a camper. And he's a productive young man now. He just got out of high school. And it was just it wasn't a huge, but these aren't programs that are widely funded. And it's like for everyone that you kind of save, if you will, or at least get on a better track, you could see 99 others that, but for the sake of that kind of exposure. And you're right. And then we end up paying the price, a much bigger price down the road, in terms of what you see in your work. My hope and prayer as an American, and I always try to keep perspective that we are still a relatively young country, but I keep hoping and praying that we make much further progress in terms of understanding the root causes of the problems, that if we had dealt with those earlier, like you said, the criminal justice system would either be greatly reduced or maybe even eliminated, because a lot of those issues would have been resolved before it got to that point. But
that's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. It's interesting too, because here in New York City, as you know, you hear a lot about violent crime, what have you, and all the studies show that crime is down, especially violent crime. But if you ask people, do you believe there's a public safety issue? Are there concerns around public safety? Do you think violent crime has gone up? People will say yes. And if you dig a little deeper and ask them why, they will identify, well, I see more unhoused people on the street. I see more trash on the street. And what they're indicating is what you touched on, which are quality of life offenses. Quality of life. Because again, we have criminalized poverty in this country. And so we know that if we take care of people, basic needs, food, shelter, allow people to be able to work and have a livable wage, take care of their families, it cuts down a lot of that pressure for folks who then find themselves making decisions that they, would not make had they had different opportunities. And it's not to say that, free will and whatnot is not a part of this. It is, but you cannot ignore systemic racism. You cannot ignore the way that our system is designed. One of the ways that it's completely imbalanced is our funding imbalance. And I know that, it's something you and I have talked about before, and I look forward to getting into that topic in particular. But one of the things I want to point out, one of the cases that we settled last year in our civil law reform unit, for example, secured a historic settlement, which secured medically necessary dental coverage for nearly 5 million New Yorkers who receive Medicaid. And this is life-changing for low-income New Yorkers across the state. Imagine, before this settlement, if you had between 4 and 8 teeth, 4 and 8 teeth in your mouth, New York State deemed you having enough teeth, a sufficient number of teeth in your mouth to where you weren't eligible for dentures and other dental services until the settlement last year. 5 million New Yorkers are going to be impacted by this. This is huge. And those 4 to 8 teeth, they don't even need to be together. So just think about that. Like, that was okay until last year with this historic settlement that we did along with our pro bono law firm partners. So when you think about, just trying to survive with the cost of eggs going up and gas, and in New York City, your salary must be 40 times the rent to live in the city, 40 times the rent.
And think about the other side of it, your perception of cleanliness, employability. People make all kinds of assumptions if you smile and there are teeth missing from your mouth. I mean, all kinds of assumptions that bear nothing to do with anything other than, boy, if your teeth look like that, where are you from? What kind of life are you living? And what kind of we're almost reflexively judgmental of each other without an intervention of some kind.
Well, it's exactly why I said, a second principle I live my life by is we judge other people's decisions without knowing what their choices were, right? To think that people would have between 4 and 8 teeth in their mouth and to assume, to your point, yes, we'll judge that person and say, oh my gosh, they're not clean, they must be on drugs or whatever happened, they don't have insurance or what have you. You don't stop to think, oh, the state precluded you from getting help. The state prohibited you from being able to get dentures until this settlement, right? And so, the work that we do here at the Legal Aid Society, I mean, case after case, and we're going to get into all of that, but the civil work especially is the stuff where you're talking about, again, employment and health and all the things that we do, tax help we do, that we can do to help people to try to really blunt, if you will, if not completely eliminate the devastating effects of poverty on individuals and families and communities. That's what we're in the business of, is trying to eliminate poverty. I always tell people, and again,
there are people who know me because they've always known me as, oh, you're a Black Enterprise, you're this, award-winning editor, blah, 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 blah. I saw you speak at this conference or whatever. But the people who really know me, and it includes many people who watch the show on a regular basis because I talk about it, I'm very transparent about it. I came from a working poor household in a working class community, but an absolute working poor household. And a big part of my passion for this is that I'm like, you judge me now because you see me as a college graduate, a successful professional, but I came from the kind of household that wouldn't have had, for example, resources to get teeth fixed. And my late mother wore dentures, I don't know the ins and outs of how she paid for them, but my point is, I know what that's like because, but for a few twists and turns and certain people looking out for me in certain spaces, I could be that person. Now, you said it. My mother also taught me and my siblings, the importance of following the rules, being respectful. So you're right. There's still a part of it that's about what I was taught in terms of my values and my choices. But I also had certain interventions that got me from there to here that had nothing to do with me making so-called good choices. Certain programs. My first job was through a program called CETA, which was basically a way to give summer jobs to underprivileged kids. That was my first job, and that's how I got employed until I went off to college. I went to school on financial aid. So I'm not under any illusions that because I was just a good law-abiding kid that I ended up where I am today. And that's why I'm so passionate about mentorship and I'm so happy to talk to you about the work that you do. But I don't want to go too far afield without talking about some of the 2 points you did raise. One, some of the work of your special litigation and policy units, but even more important, this whole idea of who's funding it all and how so much of it is unfunded, underfunded, and even have political forces that argue against the idea that the people that you serve should have protection, that these people should be discarded, thrown away, criminalized, and so the idea that taxpayer dollars should even be directed toward this population is somehow unfair.
Yeah, I appreciate you getting into this part of the topic, right? It's exactly what you said about being raised the way that you were and your amazing accomplishments that you have now. Your ability to thrive in this country is directly related to your ability to have access to resources. And that is on the individual level, that's on the family level, that's on the community level. And as the folks who stand in the gap of injustice every single day, we also experience woeful underfunding. We are woefully, egregiously underfunded and under-resourced. And, we are 90% of our funding is from the government. Public defender offices around the country share the same fate as us. Civil legal service providers share the same fate as us. And again, I want to be clear. The public defense work is the constitutionally and legally mandated work. It's required by the United States Constitution. So the government must fund that program and that service and the ability to advocate and represent people in criminal court when they're accused of a crime and presumed innocent. And yet it's not fully funded by any stretch of the imagination. For decades, we have suffered underfunding by the state and by the city, while the NYPD is, enjoying billion-dollar budgets. The NYPD has an $11 billion budget, including their pensions. And they have, blank checks from government funders. And, folks are always talking about, more law enforcement, pro-police tactics, etc. The NYPD alone has about 30 times the budget just to get to the point of an arrest that we have from prior to an arrest, because we do a bunch of work in the community through our community justice unit, which is an amazing unit that has a mobile unit that goes out and does know your rights clinics and helps young people and young adults really grapple with the issues that they're facing. And we know that, on average, about 18%, we see a reduction of about 18% of gun activity in the areas in which our community justice unit works. And yet, from that point till post-conviction, after a conviction, when a person might be on parole or probation or serving a sentence, the NYPD has 30 times our budget. And this is on us. This is on we the people. So for everybody listening and watching, this is what I want you to take from this conversation, is understanding that we allow for a system to be so imbalanced the way that we do. So when you think about, you watch the news, or you watch Law and Order and all these TV shows and you see the police doing great things. And I'm not saying, that there's not a need for police. It's not at all where I'm going with it. But where I am going with it is to say, if you care about criminal justice, if you care about social justice, if you care about human rights, issues like bail reform and prosecutorial reform and police reform and judicial reform, none of that matters if you're not going to arm the soldier in the battle, which is the public defender. It's the civil legal services attorney. It's the paralegal that we need. It's the social worker that we need. It's the case handler. It's the person who runs our checks from shared services to make sure that folks get paid on time. It's our IT. It's our comms department, so we can advertise, hey, we've got this Know Your Rights clinic coming up in your community. It's the community justice unit that we have. It's our special litigation. If you're not going to ensure that the folks who literally are the ones standing in court next to you, next to your loved one, is being paid a fair wage and actually has the resources that they need to do the job, none of this other stuff even matters.
That's important.
It just doesn't.
There, like so you said, if our audience doesn't walk away with anything else, it's that. because I'm admittedly a Law and Order. I was one of the Law and Order addicts, but even that didn't go far enough. But that was one of the few representations of the system that talked about the gross imbalance between what a public defender has to work with, whether it's investigative resources. I mean, everything you just laid out far more eloquently than I could. But still, the vast majority of popular perception is that both sides are more or less operating with equal resources, with the outliers of celebrities but I don't think, and the reason I'm so glad you're able to be on this show, because I tell people, you can't say, especially us as we as Black people, that we want equal justice, but we're not really taking a close look at what that means. Like you said, on the ground, on the front lines, when most of us, even if we're personally successful, we come from families where the vast majority of people in our family are probably going to need a public defender to get through a process like this if they have to face it. And again, we're not just talking about criminal anymore. Not that you welcome me up to that. You're talking about everything from fighting for fair housing, fighting an unfair eviction, fighting, you name it. And it's like, you can't be serious about this if you're not looking at this system and saying you can't let there be a 30-to-1 imbalance in resources. I mean, we just can't. You know,
We just can't. And so, yeah, to your point, it is probably the most frustrating part of this role, but it's also what has me jump out of bed every morning. It's why I'm so proud and honored to lead this organization and the people who fight every single day on behalf of low income New Yorkers and come to work. It is infuriating, to be very honest, to understand that everyone from the janitor to the judge in the courthouse has a government pension but us. We're the Sixth Amendment, right? We're the ones providing the services in housing court. We're the ones providing the services.
Wait, say that?
Yeah, you heard me right.
Say that again.
Everyone from the janitor to the judge who works in the courthouse has a government pension but us. And let me take it a step further. The way it works here in New York City, not only are we 30-to-1, that's just the NYPD. That's just the police. I'm not talking about the budgets for the prosecutors, the courts, the jail. That's just the police. So when you consider the prosecutor's office plus the police, that's one side. We're on the other side of the little V in every borough. And we are woefully underfunded and under-resourced. So when you talk about, to your point about the gaps that exist, this is what we grapple with every single day. We have staff and attorneys that have been here, from brand new interns to folks that have been with us for 50 years, and folks that have been working as public defenders for 50 years because they may not have what they need to retire after spending and dedicating their entire lives as lawyers. And instead of going to the corporations and not dragging anybody for your choice. But what I am saying is, if you're hearing this, if you're watching this, and you are at a law firm, or you are an attorney who went to go work as a general counsel for Google or wherever, understand that there are those of us who also went to law school who voluntarily chose to come on behalf of low-income people, to be the people's lawyer. And we aren't being paid a livable wage. We don't have a government-sponsored pension. We don't have the same resources that you do. And so it's a call to action. I am saying to you directly, what are you going to do tomorrow to be loud about this issue, to help right the wrong, just in how the system is designed? And let's be very clear, it is by design to have an imbalance like that, right? The only way that people can tout, oh, the police are so good on these issues, and these prosecutors are great, and prosecutorial reform is going too far, and this, that, and the other. Again, by design, the system is extremely effective against low-income people, which primarily includes communities and people of color. We've got staff here that if they were to be evicted from their apartment, they would qualify for our services. If they were accused of a crime, they would qualify for our services. It is infuriating, and it is what motivates me every single day to do this job so that I can do everything I can to fight for them, to get what they need so that they not only have a livable wage to be able to live in the most expensive city, arguably in the world, certainly arguably in this country, but also to be able to have their children go to childcare, be able to take a vacation with their families, to be able to live and still serve low income communities.
Wow. And listen, against that backdrop, I want to also bring in um, this upcoming election, which, no matter which way it goes, it doesn't lighten the burden of what you have to deal with. And I also want to underscore to people that you're focusing on, obviously, New York City because that's where your focus is. But this is an international issue. It's definitely a national issue. It's an
1,000.
international issue, this idea of less legal protection, less legal resources for the people who may need it, not may, who need it the most, who are least advantaged in this system. Funding imbalances, resource imbalances. And so even if you don't live in New York City, and of course we're a national media company, and obviously online we reach people around the world. This is not just New York City, it's so rough there. This is much broader. And I definitely want to wrap up repeating the calls to action because it's not just about people. That was an interesting conversation. It really should be about us, all of us, both in the profession and outside the legal profession, about what we should be doing as citizens to try to balance the scale, literally balance the scales of what we've been taught to believe is equal justice, that is anything but. But what are your thoughts about what's at stake in the upcoming election and what the world will look like for you and the work that you do post-election in the communities that you serve? I mean, there's no doubt you're going to be just as necessary, if not more necessary, no matter what happens. But what are your thoughts?
I apologize for interrupting you. You're absolutely right. I mean, as we sit here now, this is a state that in a city that has a Democratic governor, a Democratic mayor, and you hear what I just said, right? So this is the state of our profession in our world now, even before we get into the election. And you're absolutely right. The words that I am saying represent all of us throughout this entire country who do public defense and civil legal services. We are all woefully underpaid and under-resourced to do the work that we're supposed to be doing on behalf of low-income people. And the mandate is only going to increase depending on what happens and with what we can see, that is already happening. I have less rights as I sit here right now than my mother did, right? Democracy is certainly
for a second. I want to make sure if we don't understand anything else, we should have learned by now. This goes way beyond who happens to be sitting in the White House. We talked about the benches. We're talking about
way beyond
the judges. I'm telling people, I said this swing, whatever the nation swings over the history of our nation, rarely has it actually hinged on the person sitting on Pennsylvania Avenue. And if we didn't learn anything else, it's the system that you work within. The judges, the mayors. Like you said, we're in a Democratic city in New York City with a Democratic governor. And it's not like, oh, boy, we're doing okay compared. We're not necessarily. So I just think it's important for people to understand, and we naturally get caught up in the presidential election, and we get caught up in who's sitting in the White House, when most of this is the system itself is the people who are making decisions and creating policy and enforcing or not enforcing policy and laws much closer to home, much closer to my house and your house.
Absolutely. That's right. This is a local issue just as much as it is a federal national issue. The one thing that I would point out with regards to what we're seeing, we have a presidential candidate who just went through the criminal legal system and was convicted. And again, diehard public defender, this is what we do, right? But let's be very clear about the two tiers of justice that we watched play out right in front of us. our clients, had they been accused of a crime, would not have been released from jail if they were arrested without being able to post some sort of cash bail amount. And Donald Trump certainly has a lot of money to be able to post any cash bail if he needed to. Our folks do not. We know that 500,000 people on average in this country are in jail every single night who cannot afford their cash bail amount, the ransom that they have to pay just to get out of jail prior to being convicted of any crime. We know that roughly 350,000 of those people are in jail on low-level nonviolent offenses, cannot afford the cash bail amount to get out. And when that happens, that means the person's in jail. They can't pay $200, $2,000, whatever it is, to be able to go out, be with their family, go back to work, etc. We know that approximately 3 days is all it takes for your whole world to be upended. I mean, just imagine if you were arrested, wrongfully or rightfully. You were arrested, you're in jail. They take your phone. Do you have everyone's phone numbers memorized that you would know who to call to be able to post even $200? You might know your mom's number memorized, but that might not be the person that you need to borrow the money from. They may not have it. So we know that once you're in jail, the pressure to plead guilty is significantly increased. And we know that a lot of people plead guilty just to get out of jail. So to your earlier point about seeing people and judging them, when we hear about people who are convicted of a crime and we think, oh, this bad person, not necessarily. For all you know, they pled guilty just to get out of jail, just so that they could go back to work, go back to school, go back to their families. There are way more Khalif Browders in the world. And for people who don't know the Khalif Browder story, it's of a young man who was accused of stealing a backpack. He was on Rikers Island for many years, 3 years, and ultimately his case was dismissed. He ended up committing suicide afterwards, all because he couldn't afford the few $100s to be able to get out of jail. We know that census reports, U.S. Census reports, shows that the average family cannot afford a $400 emergency expense. A $400 emergency expense. So if you can't afford a $400 emergency expense, you can only imagine what the hardship that you would be facing if you had to pay money to get out of jail. But Donald Trump is a perfect example of seeing what somebody with access to resources and power looks like when they're accused of a crime. Then while he was going through his trial, he's talking to the media all day about his case and, right, talking smack about the prosecutors and the judge, everybody. Let one of our clients do that and see if they're not held in contempt and rearrested and put back in jail, right? Then he's convicted, not of one felony, 34 felonies, okay? And able to go home after those convictions. That's not how it works for the people we serve. They get convicted, they're usually remain in custody or they're taken into custody. It's just, you're watching the two tiers of justice play out right now. We watched it play out. So when we talk again about what's happening at the federal level, you don't have to go that far. Does it impact us? Sure. But it's the local level that, we all live locally. What's happening locally is what impacts us directly. And so to that point, when I talk about funding and I talk about the difference between the NYPD budget and our budget, and not counting the prosecutor's budget, the court's budget, and the corrections budget, think also of the DAs don't have to pay, the prosecutors don't have to pay their rent out of their own budget. They don't have to pay their health care costs out of their own budget. They don't have to pay their labor contracts out of their own budget.
Wow.
I do. And those costs increase every year at about 3%. And so not only are we woefully underfunded, but we're not funded then enough to keep up with the rising costs that we then have to grapple with. So then the problem is just exacerbated year after year after year. So, to your point about what's happening in the country, it is, for me, very important. Everyone needs to vote in all the elections, but let's be very clear. I need you to vote in your local election. I need you to vote and follow what's happening in your DA race. Most prosecutors, 95, if not 97% of all prosecutors run unopposed, and they're straight white men. And nobody cares, nobody follows it. So they get in over and over. Same with judges. Nobody follows the judges. Nobody knows who they are, that sort of thing. I need us, especially in the Black community, I need us to be engaged. I need us to be following these issues. I need us to not be listening to the talking points and the rhetoric on TV, but actually take the time to go into your public defender office and find out from them, what are the issues from your perspective? Because they're representing you. We're the ones who stand next to you in court, right? We're the ones who stand next to the community when you're accused of a crime or when you're having your home taken, et cetera, all the things that you've talked about. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure we understand those issues in our local community, that we're staying engaged, we're staying active around it, we're holding people accountable. We must hold our elected and appointed officials accountable for their decisions, for their rulings, and not let them off the hook when they aren't doing the things that they say they're going to do. I guarantee you our Democratic mayor and our Democratic governor says all the right things publicly, and they have certainly helped us. Don't get me wrong, in my nearly 2 years of being here, they have increased our funding. So please, I want to be very clear and fair in that. We're still woefully underfunded, but they have incrementally increased our funding, and so I appreciate that. But I want to be very clear about the fact that, you know, these are folks that, again, depending on where your politics lie, you know, these are the liberals, these are the progressives, and yet the issues are still very
I sit
pervasive
in
and
the seat of
exist.
the Beyond the Hype audience, and I have to say, I'm convicted. I know who my senator is. I know who the mayor of my town is. I have no idea who the judges are in the jurisdictions that affect where I live and the people I live around. I have no idea who the DA is. I don't know, and I should, so we all should. So, audience, you heard it here. These are things we can't just kind of, like you say, give lip service to. We want justice, Black Lives Matter, all those things that we do believe, but if that belief is not expressed in engagement and action on the local level, then it just sounds good. It's a great lawn sign. It doesn't, but it doesn't change anything. Listen, I want to return to this idea of your calls to action. Um, I know we're running out of time, which always happens with my shows. But first of all, how do people follow the Legal Aid Society? How do people connect with, whether it's on social, your website, make contributions? I don't know the best ways to engage, but I know that this conversation can end with our conversation. I want our audience to be able to know, how can I engage and make a difference? What's the best way to stay connected?
The best way to stay connected with us, of course, is just go online to our website. We are Legal Aid Society in New York City, so you can certainly Google us, go onto our website, play around with our website. You'll see all the 40 plus units that we offer to low-income New Yorkers. We are actually nationally known for the work that we do, not just being the oldest and the largest in the country doing what we do to the level that we do it, but again, the right to counsel in housing court was first done here in New York City. That's being replicated around the country. The head of our criminal practice is currently the chair of the criminal justice section for the ABA, so the American Bar Association. The head of our juvenile rights practice is serving on the board for the National Association of Public Defense, as am I. So we do have a national reach. People do watch what's happening in New York City. People want to replicate what's happening in New York City. So there are ways to stay engaged with us. We're on all your social media platforms. We're on X, formerly known as Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. You can read a lot about our stories and the work that we do and hear about, our work around immigration, for example, and learn more about, a client, a 41-year-old man from Trinidad that I know that we had, who had been in this country since he was 10 years old. And when he arrived, he was granted, a green card, if you will, along with his mom and his siblings. And after their father had died and wanted to reunite with the grandmother who actually lived here in New York City, all of the immediate family members, as well as grandmother, 2 children, everyone's a U.S. citizen. But during our clients' young adult years, began struggling with mental health issues, exactly what you kind of talked about, including depression and bipolar disorder. And so family had rallied around to support him, but because the episodes led to contact with law enforcement, and he eventually picked up some nonviolent criminal convictions, but he was repeatedly dismissed as yet another statistic, right? And not given the opportunities to address his underlying mental health needs, like you had mentioned before, that we need to be able to address those issues. And as a result of his criminal history, federal immigration authorities with ICE started proceedings to strip him of his lawful permanent residency, separating him from his entire family and deporting him back to Trinidad. And so we not only had a dedicated attorney on our staff represent him in his immigration court hearing, but we also had a social worker that we were able to give to him and his family to support them through this process, and were able to access affordable and accessible mental health treatment. And so this is an example of the holistic services that we provide here at the Legal Aid Society, whether it's through our criminal practice, whether it's through our civil practice, whether it's with our juvenile and family court practice, where we serve the entire family again to blunt and try to eliminate the devastating effects of poverty. So we would love for you to engage with us, but also if you're hearing this and you're sitting there in your living room and you live in Kansas City, or you live in LA, or you live in Houston, or you live wherever you live, this is your call to action to engage yourself with your local community and your local public defender office and your local civil legal services providers, and donate either money or time, or just stay engaged on the issues and follow up. Every time you hear about a new DA that's running, or you hear about a new judge that's running, actually engage on these issues and show up to the debates, find out what their issues are, or their positions are on particular issues. Don't just take it for granted, because then it's exactly what you said. Then we sit around talking about Black Lives Matter and we're all getting screwed in the system. And it's like, hold up. Yes. But what are you doing to help it? What are you doing to change that? And it's not just about pick yourself up by your bootstraps and, don't do the crime. You don't have to do the time. That's not, that's, you are watering down a much more complicated situation when we again have criminalized mental health, drug misuse, and poverty. So it's about staying engaged. It's about making sure that the people who are the soldiers in the battle are armed. You would never send somebody from the military into a war with no equipment, no armor, no weapons, and then expect them to succeed. And that's exactly what we do in this country around public defense and civil legal services.
You convict me, and therefore I know you convict our audience. But I used to be that guy 30 years ago. Now I'm in my mid-30s. I'm successfully graduated from college. I'm now, by this time, editor-in-chief of Black Enterprise, then the magazine. I'm the boy from my hometown that did good and came out of it. And I was one of those guys that would say, well, the best way to deal with the criminal justice system is not get involved with the criminal justice system. And, the reason and I look back on my naivete and arrogance as a successful young Black man who said, well, the reason I'm here is because I made all right decisions. I didn't have trouble with law enforcement. And my mother would say, yes, that's where I raised them. But no, it's a lot more than that.
Right.
And I would say to our audience to echo and underscore what you said, this is very complex. And often we get lost in the complexities. I would say, if you focused on no other issue in your town, in your state, in wherever you are, engaging the institutions that Twyla Carter has emphasized for wherever you live, if you just address the imbalance in funding. And let's say, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum, you may be the super law and order person, or you may be the only justice is just us. Because again, we fall on all those spectrums, even in the Black community. But there's no way as a citizen of this country to look at, like you said, I'm thinking 30-1, and you're saying, no, that's just the police. So let's say for the sake of conversation, it's 100-1 imbalance. There's no way that could be fair, American, equal justice on any level, whether the person did it or the person didn't do it. And so my thing is, if all you do is press, your local representatives to say, no, we can disagree about what to do with crime, but we can't agree with 100-1 imbalance, where this is a system that's really designed to protect all American citizens from being unjustly dealt with in this system. So I always boil it down, in my opinion, boil it down to one thing. if you can't, you can debate about sentencing. You can debate about whether a drug should be criminalized there's a lot of, but you can't debate, in my opinion, 100-to-1 funding imbalance. And I'm charging our audience. You should know what the funding imbalance is in your community, and you should be leaning on those to represent you to say, what is this, and why are we living with this, and why are we accepting this? If we are promoting to ourselves, and for me, more importantly, to our children, this is a country of equal justice, and I raised a son. I'm a girl dad. I got 4 daughters and 1 son. But when my son became a teenager, that's when I was like, man, this equal justice thing, I don't know what's going to happen to my young, and now he's a grown man with a son of his own, my grandson. But still, he's in his early 30s. I don't know what will happen if he gets pulled over and, in the wrong place at the wrong time, doing the right or wrong thing. And if it doesn't become that real for us, we'll be one of those people that says Black Lives Matter, but if they did it, they should go to jail.
That's absolutely right. And so it speaks to a bunch of the culture shifts that we need to make in this country. One, to your point, I don't know anybody who grew up perfectly. I know some of us didn't get caught. I know that. 2, I know that when we drive by and we see somebody sitting on the side of the road and the police have pulled them over, 1,000% of the time, people are going to think, ooh, I wonder what they did. Instead, there's an innocent person who might be being harassed by the police. We don't think about it like that, right? The presumption of innocence actually matters in this country, and due process actually matters in this country. So there's a lot of cultural shifts that we need to make with our mindset around that. But to your point around, I'm a very privileged person. I've got a law degree. I was raised by 2 parents. All kinds of blessings have been bestowed upon me and continue to be bestowed upon me, for which I am greatly appreciative. But, let me be very clear. It is direct line to your access to resources and your access to be able to have a support system and mentorship and coaching and opportunities. That is what changes the game in the United States of America. So if you are a person who was sitting here, especially a Black person, listening to this segment, listening to this program, again, I am saying to you directly, what are you going to do tomorrow to make sure that the system is more balanced, so that we actually can protect people and serve people? And then wherever the dust falls after that, then that makes sense to me. But to start writing people off and just saying that they're bad and they've done this, that, and the other, when it is woefully imbalanced the way that it is, there's not a prosecutor or a police officer in my mind that can tout how great they are when this is how the system is designed. You don't get to say that we're awesome at catching the bad guy when you are that much further ahead than the people on the other side. And when I know from being a line public defender for over a decade and handling class action lawsuits all over this country and doing policy work and advocacy work all over this country, when I know that so many people plead guilty and make decisions and has nothing to do with criminality, has nothing to do with that.
If we're going to end it there, I don't see how we can make it any stronger than you just said it. What are we going to do tomorrow? Thank you so much for being my guest on Beyond the Hype. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for the education that you just provided me sitting right here. Again, I'm a perfect example. I learned a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't know that I need to think about differently, and not only think about, but act on in terms of my own role as a citizen in this country, and particularly as a Black person in this country. So I just want to I appreciate you. I appreciate the work of you and everyone that does the work that you do on your team. Just thank you for making time to be with us on Beyond the Hype.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And to everybody out there, be bold and be courageous and push really hard back against the system, folks. And right when you get to the point of where you feel uncomfortable, know that that's your starting point.
Before I let you go, I do want to ask you a question that I think is important to ask our audience to hear. You've laid out pretty much that you as an individual, the people you represent, who work with you and under you and alongside you, are literally, as you said, you got a slingshot and you're going against people with nuclear capacity, but you still do it. What is that? What is that Absolutely. That makes you do it when no one would blame you? Say, you know what? Or keep doing it because no one would blame you. Like you said, you're not judging anybody when you're talking about some of your peers that have made other choices in their legal careers. But what is it that makes Twyla get up every day and even, show up to be here on Beyond the Hype to say, oh, I got an opportunity to represent what I do and why it's important? What keeps you going? Because I know that everyone has those days, even when they have a quote unquote great job or a great life, when they're like, man, I'm not here for this. What is it?
I am here, and the people that I work with and the people who work with me that I am so honored that work with me and that I am able to work with dedicated our professional careers to being movement lawyers, if you will, which for me means using our law degree to build power for people closest in proximity to the injustice. And for me and for others, failure and giving up are just not options. We are in the middle of a civil war, and it could get exponentially worse depending on what happens locally and nationally. Now is the time to understand that we need to organize and strategize and come together and hold our elected and appointed officials accountable, and to arm the soldiers that are willing, and able to stand in the gap of injustice and do this work every single day. It is a thrill and an honor for me to take this job every day. This is a dream job for me, to be able to quarterback on behalf of the soldiers in this war every single day, who come in here and fight back on behalf of low-income people, fight back against the devastating impacts of poverty. And like I said, I'm a privileged person to be able to do that. It is an honor to be able to do it. And again, failure and giving up are not options.
Wow. Well, we're going to leave it there. I can't think of a better place to leave it. Thank you for what you do. Thank you. Thank everybody on your team, everybody that does the work that you do on behalf of myself, Black Enterprise, Beyond the Hype. I just really appreciate you. You give me a lot of food for thought. I got a lot of work to do. Thank you so much. Well, everybody, even I wasn't prepared for all of this, so I know you weren't either. But again, we delivered a great show. This is Alfred Edmond Jr. You've been listening to Beyond the Hype with Black Enterprise. Thanks for listening. Take action. Don't just say a good conversation was had. And we'll see you next time.